Welcome and hello. I'm Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the MEND Project. In this workshop titled Healing Strategies for Complex Trauma, I'm going to share steps that you can take towards healing post-trauma. We're going to look at overcoming the confusion, deciding whether to stay or go, and I'll share some tips on navigating the court system and post-separation abuse. We're also going to talk about rumination, that thing where you just play a prior argument over and over in your head because you're confused. And we're going to talk about healing from trauma, what it actually takes, and healing from trauma bonding. So please join us in this conversation and gain new tools for deeper healing today. Steps towards healing. What does it really take? I just want you to know that there is hope. If you are stuck in the midst of being really dysregulated and constantly feeling like you're under attack or emotional assault, there is hope for you. You can overcome, whether you decide to stay or leave. You're going to heal better if you leave or have a separation, but it can be accomplished in both of those scenarios. And I just want to encourage you, because there's been thousands and thousands of victims who have gone before you and they have made it to the other side, and so will you. It's psychological and emotional abuse often causes deep confusion, and that perpetuates dysregulation. And we're going to talk to you and give you tools to overcome that confusion, which will help to mitigate your trauma almost on an immediate basis. Many survivors don't initially realize that what they're experiencing is abuse. So we're going to really give you tools to provide clarity about your situation. And we want to encourage you to educate yourself about abuse terms and dynamics that will help to validate your experience. You can find our emotional abuse terms and definitions on our website resource page. This is a powerful tool that, if you aren't already familiar with it, I really want you to take time to go to our tools and resource page and look up terms and definitions and study these specific terms that describe what manipulative methods have been used against you. Because the more clarity you will gain, the better able you will be to see what's happening in real time while it's happening. We say that clarity is the first necessary step to healing, and I cannot overemphasize that. By being able to recognize the ploys being employed against you, the better able you will be to prevent yourself from being blindsided and caught in this never-ending cycle or circular conversation that leads to nowhere, or certainly to no solutions. I want you to study the terms and really familiarize yourself with them so that you can quickly identify when the offender uses them against you. In real time. By being able to identify them in real time, you'll be able to say, okay, here's blame shifting. I'm not going to engage. I can see what's happening. This is not about me. I'm not going to get sucked into the vortex of this never-ending circular conversation. I'm going to recognize the behaviors and distance myself. And I'll talk to you about detaching a little bit later. A significant reason why survivors become so confused and then ruminate about what actually happened, in a prior argument, is because when multiple abusive, manipulative tactics are being used against you in one conversation, it becomes very difficult to discern what is real and what is gaslighting. It's too confusing to recognize the patterns that are happening. Let me explain that a little bit. If somebody were to solely just lie to you, and I don't mean just as in reducing the importance or the impact of lying. But if somebody were to solely be using lying against you, you would easily be able to recognize this person is not trustworthy. I can't trust their word. But if they're lying and they're in denial and they're blame shifting and they're gaslighting and they're catastrophizing and they're countering you and they're doing so many other of the terms, it becomes too confusing to be able to recognize the patterns. And so by really learning these terms and definitions, you're going to be able to recognize those complex patterns. And the more familiar you become with them, which isn't a hard task, it's actually looking at the terms and definitions is very validating and will give you answers to numerous questions that you may have. But by understanding those, you won't be caught off guard. You'll be able to see them and recognize them for what they are, rather than having it blindside you and suck you into this conversation where you're on the defensive, having to explain yourself. Excuse me. So recognizing the patterns is a really big step towards your clarity and healing. You can also visit our website at themendproject.com to learn about the concept of covert emotional abuse, which is what these terms and definitions describe, and then the double abuse that you may be experiencing from family or friends, or maybe from your therapist, or maybe from leaders at your church or synagogue, or whatever religious setting you belong to, if you've confided in them. And that is also very validating to realize that it is not your fault. These people are getting it wrong, and it has nothing to do with your character and who you are as a person. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about rumination. Another word that is used for this in clinical terms is perseveration. Don't Google perseveration because it's an entirely different definition, but the clinical definition of perseveration has to do with replaying something in your mind over and over again. You're almost fixated on it because you can't make sense of what happened. And it's normal to fixate or replay events, especially when someone is constantly turning the conversation around on you and causing you to be responsible for things that they're actually responsible for. And so your mind is trying to make sense of this traumatic experience and organize it. And without really understanding the behaviors that are being used, that's what's going to happen, is you're going to ruminate over this to try to not just organize, but to put things in order so you can understand what actually occurred in the conversation. Because otherwise it's just leaves you in a mire of confusion. It's like you're in a hole trying to climb out, and you're in a river and you're being flooded by water drowning you. You can't find your way to the surface. So another way to overcome rumination is to journal. And you don't have to do long, detailed journals, but if you can journal bullet points of like what your offender said to you. Because how often have you been in a situation where they say, I never said that, you said that, or you said this when you know you never said it, but then you start doubting yourself. You doubt whether they said it when they tell you they didn't. You doubt whether you said something based on what they're telling you after the fact. So to put something down in a journal gives you, and many of you may have already done this or even recorded conversations, to prove to yourself what actually occurred. You won't, well, let me back up a little bit. So if you can journal what took place and then match it to the terms and definitions, you will not only feel immediate validation, you will see that this is not your fault, that this person is very unhealthy and using toxic methods to manipulate and overpower and control you. And that does not make your situation better, but it makes your internal, your self-recognition and your self-identity better, because you can see that this is not about you. It's not that you're unlovable. It's not that something is intrinsically wrong with you. It's not that it's your fault. It is solely about the other person not having healthy character qualities to be able to navigate emotional conversations, or not even being interested in navigating or hearing your emotions or deepening your connection. They're interested in winning arguments and powering over you. And to organize that through your journal entries is really a wonderful tool to help you overcome a lot of that dysregulation and those feelings of being overwhelmed. I want you to begin learning about trauma bonds as well, because that addictive feeling that you have, it is truly an addiction, where you are the confusing emotional attachment that were formed like during the love bombing stage at the beginning of the relationship, when you thought everything was going well, until their mask came off and they revealed their true self. You long for that connection again, even though that connection was really a game. It was a mask on their part. It was not authentic from their perspective. They were playing a role, but you bought into that and connected deeply with this person. And now you are attached to them in a way that's based on what took place early and not based on what's actually really happening. You're not looking at it objectively. So recognizing these bonds is key to breaking free emotionally. And a trauma bond is like an addiction, and it takes work to break the addiction. It's not an easy trauma bonds. On talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but I want you to be aware that we do have a workshop about trauma bonds, a prior workshop that I hope that you will take the time out to view, because you really need to understand this in order to overcome that strong longing to connect deeper with the offender. Okay, I have a question for you. Have you ever found yourself not remembering what started an argument, or replaying the words spoken after an argument because you were confused? Or have you ever noticed that sometimes it can take days to figure out the manipulative ploys that were used against you in a prior argument? I would love to hear if any of you have struggled with that, or if you've recognized that and how much of an impact that has had on you. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to input your answers.
We have some people saying yes, days, weeks, months, years. While people are still writing, I want to let you know that we have people here who are just grateful. They want to heal from intimate partner betrayal trauma and all the abuse that they've experienced. So I wanted to just share that with you, Annette. There were some comments made about freezing and people who used to freeze and not be able to remember what was said whenever they were spoken to. And someone had made a comment about, in hindsight, wishing they had nanny cams set up with sound to record the interactions and include that in therapy, journals, audios, that kind of thing. So I wanted to make sure to communicate that to you. And as I get to these next answers that are all landing, which is so awesome. We have people who say they're still struggling, still feeling like they're going crazy. Someone said, this is why it is difficult that he has yet to face himself in his own therapy. I asked if he spoke about the abuse he put me through, what he has done to the kids by not believing me or them, and he never did. He has one last shot or I am gone. someone saying, especially when he is telling me that things were said that are not said, or the other way around. And then someone sharing they're having a sleep disorder from it as well. And another one, I am
so sorry for what you're all going through or have been through. I remember going through it myself, and it was so overwhelming and toxic. I just felt the stress in my body day after day, from morning to night, the anxiety, the depression, the need to isolate. I didn't want to be around friends because I felt like I had to be so fake, and I couldn't reveal what was really going on in my life. And I couldn't figure out what was going on in my life. We were in therapy with we tried multiple therapists for extended periods of times. And I couldn't articulate what started an argument. And when these behaviors would play out in the therapist's session, the therapist didn't recognize these ploys. It was so overwhelming. And so I just feel so much compassion for you, but want to tell you that there is hope. If you take some of these steps that we're going to talk about today, I promise you that you are going to feel, you're not going to be immediately healed. It's a long process, but you are going to feel instantaneously so much better if you can identify these behaviors and put things in more accurate context. Because right now, you are on the defensive. You are trying to be heard. You are trying to understand. And we're going to help give you these tools to overcome at least those early stages of what it takes to launch you on your healing journey. And then we'll give you other tips to partake in that will take you further down the path. Are there any other comments, Jill, that you want to mention?
There are, and I want to say this real quick, Annette, because there's a few people who are talking about their experience with therapists. And one notes that the therapist is telling him he, quote, has the right to be heard, equaling saying horrible things to me, essentially. He has the right to be heard regardless if it's horrible. And then another one saying the therapist double abuse is the worst. I had a therapist tell me not to leave him because I loved him. I sat there next to him while he berated me for being Jekyll and Hyde dying inside. That's the moment I knew I had to leave. And a couple other people have mentioned therapists, and I just want you to share our resource for choosing a therapist and just maybe impart some wisdom there.
Absolutely. First off, couples therapy is contraindicated whenever any form of abuse is present, meaning it is not advisable. And therapists in their academic journey do not learn, they're not required to learn about domestic violence or narcissistic abuse or covert emotional abuse. So the way they learn about that is if they take continuing education courses about it, if that's their interest. But if it's not, or if they are a family therapist or a couples therapist and they don't really understand narcissistic abuse, they're not going to take those courses. And I can't tell you, I mean, my husband and I had the resources to seek out these published therapists who wrote many books and et cetera. They did not understand what was happening. They did not identify it. And in fact, I remember one time I said, this is narcissistic abuse. And the therapist said, well, and I was just alone with the therapist at that time. And he said, well, I don't like to use labels. We absolutely need to use labels to provide clarity and validation to the person on the receiving end of the harm. I mean, it is toxic to be in couples therapy with someone who is abusive if that therapist is not an expert in abuse. And there aren't a lot of experts in abuse. And if you need help with that, I can direct you to some. But it's a horrible experience. And I'm just so sorry that you went through that. I know how overwhelming and how you just feel like you're being ganged up on and not being supported. A therapist's obligation is to support the victim 100% and to confront the abuser. That's what should be happening. To support the abuser or the offender in their changes, their positive changes, but to confront them and hold them accountable through all the other. And no, you should not have to, your husband should not have had to be heard if he can't communicate in a civilized way. And you shouldn't have to listen to blaming statements and all of that. No, that is really unhealthy and toxic communication. And that's not the way a healthy family operates. So I don't know what your therapist was thinking, but it was just really an ignorant statement and a damaging statement to make to you. Yeah. Jill, are there any other comments?
There are several, but I'll save some of them for later. I do want to read one of them to you real quick while we're on this topic here. It's a little longer, but I'm going to read it to you. So if you need me to pause or repeat, just let me know.
Okay.
I've been in a 20-year relationship that involved psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse, as well as emotional neglect. I have CPTSD from childhood trauma and now adult trauma. I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, hypothyroidism, ADHD, and depression and anxiety. Everything came crashing to the rock bottom after I got on proper meds for my ADHD and the fog lifted. We had a massive intervention. We are in therapy as a family. It felt surreal for a few months. I was prepared to walk away. I educated myself and took control of the situation that was harming our child. He is a dismissive, avoidant, and I endured narcissistic abuse for the entirety of my marriage. He sees now. We are healing only because he allowed his ego to be crushed and put on the new personality, taking this seriously.
If it's very uncommon for an offender to self-reflect and take responsibility for their behaviors. So if that is what is happening in your relationship, congratulations. That is what happened in my relationship as well. We went to this expert abuse therapist, and my husband, it took him 2 years. We were separated for 3 years. It took him 2 years of intensive therapy where he would go for days at a time to unpack all of the faulty thinking patterns and then reframe what healthy patterns look like. It was a long process, and I could not have communication with him during that time. So I'm happy for you that you are experiencing progress, but I want to also caution you that oftentimes they're able to pull it together temporarily to meet the requirements that the therapist is putting before them. But then later they have significant setbacks and they go back into what has been habitually known their entire lives. So I want you to tread with caution and require that you see these changes over a long-standing period of time, not just 3 months, 6 months, a year. It takes a long time to see if that change really has transformed their thinking patterns. And an occasional setback, but then a quick recovery where they apologize and say, well, can I have a do-over? I didn't handle that well. That's doable, but a complete setback where they are stubborn and they want to win and all of that is going to not be sustainable. So I just want to caution you, and I want to caution everyone else that the statistics show that only 3 to 11% of offenders ever change. And so I never recommend that you pursue that avenue because so few therapists are skilled and so few offenders change. And I want you to find your life, your peace, your joy. It's totally your decision what you want to do. Some may want to go to an expert abuse therapist just to see if over a few months, if they notice any change from their partner or not. And I've seen many healthy partners say, I saw how slow the process was and how rigid and inflexible my offender was, that I then decided to terminate the relationship. But I feel good about giving it one last chance to see what could be accomplished. So I just want to put context to that statement. Okay, is there anything else you want me to address, or shall I move on?
You can go ahead and I'll save the rest.
Okay, so now I want to talk about emotional detachment, because what's really important is that you recognize the trauma bond that you have, the attachment that's really based on a false narrative, a false experience, because their mask is now off. And now you're dealing with the real person. And so what we tend to do is we tend to want to connect. A healthy person wants to continually deepen their emotional connection with their spouse or their partner. That's what healthy is. You go through conflicts, you work them out, you share successes in your life. It could be small emotional successes or tangible accomplishments that you then feel supported your spouse, and it draws you nearer together and you become more emotionally safe for each other. But when you're dealing with a covert narcissist, there is no emotional safety. And so it's essential that you quit bringing your vulnerabilities to that person, quit looking for their affirmations when you do something well, and seek that from other people and begin to emotionally detach yourself from them. And so detachment means aiming to separate your identity, the way you view yourself, the way you value yourself, your self-worth, and your well-being from how others treat you. In other words, the way your spouse is treating you does not define who you are. You need to draw on yourself. You are your own best advocate. You need to recognize more accurately what your circumstances are and not need validation and emotional connection from a person who is unwilling and incapable of offering that to you. Oftentimes when you've accomplished something or you want to go and accomplish something, they get jealous and don't feel comfortable with that. They may say, quit working, or no, don't go back to school, and other things. They don't want you to be autonomous, but you want to seek autonomy. You want to seek that because it's actually a healthier, even in healthy relationships, having complete autonomy and being strong in your own right and being able to affirm yourself and love yourself and believe in yourself and believe in your self-worth is a healthier stance to come from, rather than this more codependent style where you need the other person to fulfill you. So I want you to begin the process of emotionally detaching. Don't bring your vulnerabilities to this person. Bring them to a safe friend. Don't seek emotional connection and involvement, because it's only going to lead to you feeling more confused and overwhelmed when they let you down. They're still focused on winning arguments, and emotional detachment requires really a radical acceptance of the truth about your circumstances. So I want you to stop gaslighting yourself or believing something that you can say or do is going to change the way you're being cheated or change the way that your offender thinks or responds to you. I want you to view your circumstances accurately rather than with false hope. And that's a hard reality to accept, but it is essential to your healing. That's why I say radical acceptance. It is a complete, probably in your case, or in many of your cases, a complete change of your mindset from longing to want to be supported by your partner to distancing yourself and seeking your support elsewhere, and accepting that you're not going to have a deep emotional connection with this person, that your goal is to separate yourself and to become strong and autonomous. So what often happens is in abusive situations, we emotionally detach from ourselves rather than emotionally detaching from the offender. So that means that you start to gaslight yourself. You start thinking things like, I must not be lovable, or what did I must have said, I made that person angry because I said or did this or that. You can say or do or complain or say many things, and it doesn't warrant the kind of responses that you're getting. And you are lovable. Everybody deserves love, and you are worthy. Everybody has value, and there's not something intrinsically wrong with you. You might want to look at why you chose somebody who's emotionally unavailable. And that has a lot to do with your relationship with your primary caregivers. And we also have a workshop called Self-Love Deficit Disorder and Self-Love Abundance that will help you look at some of those things. But basically, I just want you to love yourself and to distance yourself and look at things more accurately. Okay, now I want to transition to, should I stay or should I go? And this question brings up strong emotions. It brings up uncertainty and even fear for many of you. If you're not dealing with physical threats, or if you feel confident that your spouse won't physically assault you, take your time making big decisions until you've done the work to gain some real strength. Knowledge is power. And that goes back to the terms and definitions and to a number of articles and workshops on our website. You want to educate yourself in this early stage. You want to start practicing boundaries and the emotional detachment that I just talked about as essential first steps before you feel strong enough to make such a big decision about whether you should stay or go. And I just want to talk a bit about boundary setting because it takes courage. So it's important to take baby steps. In other words, choose to set a boundary and create a consequence if the boundary is broken that you feel confident you can follow through with. It might mean something like, I don't want you to set boundaries that are so big with big consequences that you then aren't ready to follow through with. Or you might feel like, this is it, this is the last time, and I'm going to tell him to leave the house. But you know you've said that before and you don't have the strength to follow through with it. Your fear overtakes you, your anxiety overtakes you. So don't set boundaries that are too large that you know that you may not be able to follow through with. Because a boundary without a consequence that you follow through with is nothing more than a suggestion or a complaint. So I want you to think about, it might mean something that you simply tell your offender, I will not engage in hostile discussions, and then you walk away. So you're basically saying, I'm not going to stay in a discussion with you where you're being uncooperative, and you walk away. You just say, this conversation is over. That's a good beginning boundary. Now, it's not a good beginning boundary if you have somebody who is such a rageaholic that they're going to follow you around the house and harass you. That is a more escalated situation that might take more courage, and you might need to be stronger before you say, I'm not doing this, and walk away and lock the door. So I'm not wanting to put you in any danger is what I'm trying to say. And you know what's best about the boundaries are highly personal. and very individualized. And you know what's best, what you and a boundary is not you trying to control another person. It's about creating a safe space for you to live out the situation free from abuse. So then later on, when you're stronger, you might have the courage to say, I'm not going to talk to you when you're like this. And in fact, this has been such a pattern and you're not changing, even though you've promised to change. And so I am moving out of our bedroom. Or you might say, I'm putting a lock on our bedroom door and you're no longer allowed inside without my permission. Something like that. Or I'm going to leave or you have to leave. Those are larger boundaries that you really need to have the courage and the strength to be able to follow through with. So I don't want you to set yourself up for failure, because it will embolden the offender, knowing that you don't have the strength to keep your word. So it's a process. And I'm not saying that boundaries are, I'm not saying that your lack of boundaries makes you responsible for what's happening in the relationship. Healthy couples just need to have a conversation and they respect each other's boundaries. It doesn't make you responsible for the abuse that you don't have really strong boundaries. I'm not saying that in any way. It is a process of learning and strengthening oneself to be able to set the boundaries that are required for these crazy makers and these boundary crashers that offenders are. Okay, now I want to touch back on trauma bonding for just a couple minutes. Trauma bonds keep survivors emotionally tethered to those who have harmed them. You seek to be soothed by the very person who has been harming you. And if you just look at that and take your own story out of those words and you frame it with, say, some other person or some other couple, to try to be soothed by a person who's being harmful is not really rational thinking. It's more like you're gaslighting yourself. Or they're gaslighting themselves. So we need to recognize that this person might soothe you for a moment after they blow up and attack you or assault you emotionally or physically. Then they are going to do that honeymoon phase to try to fix it in the cycle of abuse. But it's not authentic. It's not objective to want to be in that kind of dynamic. So it's understandable how trauma bonds formed, but it's not rational to seek comfort from the offender. So I want you to read your journal entries, to reorient yourself, to get your perspective more accurate. Reading journal entries helps you remember how toxic and harmful they are during those honeymoon phases that keep drawing you back to want to be soothed by this person. I want you to really understand how toxic this relationship is, how harmful and abusive it is, and what you're really having to endure for the most of the time. The cycle of harm then becomes clearer and clearer over time. But you need to do the work of actually looking at your journals, looking at the terms and definitions, and really calculating or documenting how often these events are occurring. I want you to practice loving yourself well, speaking kindly to yourself in your mind, and take rest when you need it. Do things that are going to soothe yourself. Be the person who soothes yourself. And I'm going to talk more about healing and how you can rely on others for that too, but not your offender. And I want you to say no when something feels off. I want you to be able to get to that place, which will help to break the trauma bond. I want you to build a new narrative worth what tells you you are. Even if it's subtle things like nothing I do makes you happy, or you're always complaining, or you're so critical. Even subtle things like that can break you down. But we're entitled to complain and criticize when there's something worthy of criticism. That's bringing an important issue to your partner so that you can work through that. The problem is they don't work through it. So I don't want you to take on the narrative that they're giving you. I want you to create your own narrative about yourself. And you might have to go back and look at the narrative that was created in your early childhood. And many times, people who choose offenders as their partner have unresolved attachment disruptions from their childhood. My parents were emotionally unavailable, so I never really developed a strong sense or a confidence in my perspective. So I felt like something was intrinsically flawed about myself because I never felt really loved and validated. I know my parents loved me and they did a lot of things for me, but emotionally they were immature. And so they didn't give me space it wasn't emotionally safe to express my emotions. I was more condemned for expressing emotions. So I never built that sense of confidence in believing in my own emotions and trusting my emotions. And that primed me to choosing somebody who is abusive. And I don't mean to be talking about myself, but you might have a narrative similar to that or something different, but it's really important work to go back and look at that so that you can create a new narrative and really work on loving yourself well. Okay, now I want to touch briefly on navigating the court system and post-separation abuse, because I just want to give you some tips about navigating this part of the process if you're in it or if you think you will be in it. It can feel so intimidating to be part of the legal process, and it's very traumatizing, especially when post-separation abuse continues and when your offender is lying or distorting facts to make you appear to be the offender. I've seen it all. And so I want you to be prepared for that. If you're not in that stage yet, that they almost panic, losing control. And so they will use anything to regain control over you and control over their situation. So I need you to really be prepared that can happen. So I want you to educate yourself on how to present to mediators, court-appointed counselors, or court-appointed evaluators, and even judges. I want you to stay grounded in the true facts, which means document everything clearly and consistently. Don't delete. I want you to put dates in your journals. Document it, particularly if it relates to the kids, if you have custody. But in any case, document everything. And it doesn't have to be this long, drawn out, detailed thing, but the important parts need to be documented. And then don't delete any texts, emails, photographs, recordings, and so forth. Even if you find them triggering, remove them into a file and make a backup copy so that you have that, because you never know if your offender gets access to your phone and deletes things. So these can be really important later on in court if you have a video of an argument or something like that, any kind of evidentiary information. I want you to dress, speak, and behave in ways that reflect the truth without over-explaining or trying to defend or prove yourself. I don't want you to spend a lot of time describing how abusive your partner is. I just want you to think about submitting facts and staying calm. You don't need to explain yourself. It's so much more important for you to present that you have the documentation. And if you're allowed to tell your story, you do it briefly. even while your offender is lying in court and distorting the truth. You simply state that is not true. This is what is true. And my concern is not trying to overcome these false accusations. My concern is getting through this in the most amicable way possible and protecting the children, and creating a safe environment for the kids, or if you're dealing with children. Consider working with trauma-informed professionals when possible. Most trauma-trained therapists have knowledge of narcissistic abuse. They might not be experts, but they'll at least understand that, and they'll understand how its impact on you. So even though you have every reason to be traumatized, it's essential when you're going through court and so forth that you know that many court personnel are not familiar with trauma and its symptoms. So if you're crying or you're shaking and you have a hard time, it's called fragmented thinking and communication. And this is very common with trauma victims, that you lose your train of thought and you have a hard time communicating. It's so important that you work with a trauma therapist to help prepare you for times that you'll be in court, so that you can really watch your body language and keep it in check. You don't want to be labeled or perceived as the unstable one or the one who cannot control your emotions. The calmer you stay, the more opportunity your offender has to look like the one who is deceitful or out of sorts. And the calmer you stay, the more out of sorts they're likely to become, which is what you want the judge to see. Your offender is going to make false accusations against you. It's almost a guarantee. And it's very unfair and can be very disorienting. But I want you to stay calm, stay focused on being fair. So if you have children, let your actions show that you have your children's best interests in mind. Even if your spouse has been abusive towards your children, if you try to gain more custody than what is normal in court situations in your area, you're going to risk being perceived as the controlling one who intends to alienate your child from the harmful parent. Now, if there's physical abuse or severe emotional abuse, and you've documented it, maybe by calling CPS, Child Protective Services, and it's documented, that's one thing. But if it's not documented and you don't have proof, you're better off being fair. And then once the custody situation is resolved, they usually don't want to spend a lot of time with the kids anyways, and you can just take on more time. There's other ways to work it out. I just don't want you to be perceived as somebody trying to alienate the child against the abusive spouse without proof to document it, because then you will end up losing the lion's share of custody. So that's really, I just wanted to bring your attention to that, because it's worth it for you to, there's a website called Coercive Control Consulting, and they have so many tips about dealing with a narcissist post-separation or going through a divorce. And it's really important that you be aware of these things and educate yourself and regulate your trauma and understand how you need to present. You're going to re-traumatize yourself if you can't show up to court well. And so that's why I want you to be aware of this. Okay, now I want to talk about what it really takes to heal from trauma. And I've talked about really understanding the dynamics of your relationship, the terms and definitions, really being able to look at your journal and say, that was blame shifting, that was catastrophizing, oh, here was denial, or here was countering. I made a simple request, but he did the opposite, or she did the opposite, rather than meeting my simple request. And you're able to document for yourself, which brings you validation that you desperately need, and it brings you clarity. And you start working on memorizing these or understanding these terms and definitions. That's like the first step to healing, that clarity part. And then I want you to start being gentle but proactive with yourself. You might be isolating for the same reasons I did, or for different reasons. I want you to it's going to feel uncomfortable if you've been isolating, but think of the healing process requires that you stretch yourself. You need to do things that don't feel really comfortable to you. So maybe it's reconnecting with activities that once brought you joy, whether it's jogging, walking, an exercise class, an art activity, or whatever it is, connecting with friends. Maybe your friends have harmed you because they didn't believe your story. So it's doing things that are going to connect you with new friends, joining a hiking club or joining a class of some sort that will bring you connections with other people. Because even superficial conversations will bring you joy, will produce endorphins to counteract the stress hormones, the cortisol and the adrenaline that's surging through your body. You need endorphins. You need positive interactions. And that means you have to, your doorbell is not just going to ring by itself, and your phone is not going to ring by itself. You need to take proactive steps to make that happen. And that is really hard for trauma victims to do. But you're going to stay stuck in your healing journey, not progressing, if you don't force yourself to stretch yourself. You want to be involved in movement and physical activity. I'm a big fan of joining an exercise class rather than just doing something alone, even though getting on your treadmill or something is excellent to do, because you need that, produces endorphins and it works off a lot of the cobwebs that are stuck in your mind. It'll clear your thoughts. It gives you a chance to work out a lot of that. But when you join a class, then you're meeting new people, and the same people go each week, and you start developing new friendships that I think is really helps you to feel valued and cared for and loved by other people. I mean, it takes time to develop those relationships, but over time, it's very fulfilling and can really help you overcome those feelings of lack of self-worth and lack of being lovable and those sorts of things. So any kind of physical activity is going to help you. Consider art, music, writing, any form of creative expression. I'm going to stand up for a second. I made this sweatshirt, and it's just applique and embroidery. And then I got a little knitting machine to make the cords. I started doing artistic things, making my grandchildren blankets with embroidery and applique and things like that. And I joined pickleball lessons and started learning how to play, and then made a lot of new friends that way. And I had already healed a lot, but I wasn't able to regulate my emotions very well. And when I started doing other activities, it really helped me make that final stretch of we're never fully healed. Trauma is a friend that never leaves, or an enemy that never leaves, however you want to frame it. But it's so important that like this process of making this, I had to map out the idea in my mind. So that was very creative. I had to sketch out what I wanted to then cut out in fabrics. All of that took me time and creativity. And then the process of sewing it together was very relaxing and allowed me to just think about what I was doing and not about anything else. It allowed me to escape. It's like reading a great book or seeing a really good movie, but you have this sense of accomplishment at the end. And so I really encourage you to do that. And if you're a guy, maybe tinkering with cars or woodworking or pottery, for both male or female, any type of creative expression is really healthy. The other thing is, I want you to have connections with safe people, even if it's just one or two people. But the more people that you can have safe connections with, the better. You have to let some of your old friends go who just don't understand and are not going to, or you have to keep them at a very superficial level. But start working on having connections, even if they start out superficially, like superficial, joyful conversations about, you know, your interests and whatever. It's going to be healthy, but that will develop into, and you'll be able to see which ones are safe that you can have a deeper connection with. So let yourself stretch into these new spaces emotionally, relationally, physically, and creatively. I cannot overemphasize enough how critical it is to healing. I talk to so many victims who they just do the first part of the healing and then they never do this other part. And they're stuck for year upon, decades even, not progressing through their trauma. I promise you, if you do these things, you're going to see such a shift. And think about autonomy. We want you to feel autonomous. We want you to have a good sense of autonomy. Doing these other activities helps build your own autonomy. And so even if you don't feel confident to be autonomous at the beginning, this confidence will become infused in your very being, and you will be able to attain that. So I just want to emphasize one more thing that I myself, which we have workshops on. It's really important that you take a look at that, because that's your childhood experience with your primary caregivers that has probably a lot to do with your relationship now. And it's worth looking into that and doing some work on that with a therapist, and understanding that your beliefs that came from childhood about yourself can really negatively impact your confidence and your strength. And so it's very worthwhile to do that work. Sorry, there's dogs barking. Okay, so I also just want to touch on, because I know we're out of time, your offender has faulty thinking patterns that are deeply rooted in, well, you can go to our tools and resource page to the pillars of abuse, and there you will understand the mindset of offenders. But we also had faulty thinking about ourselves, or faulty beliefs, or like I remember thinking, you cannot divorce because I'm a Christian, so I can't divorce unless there's adultery. Well, that was a belief that I had. I put more value on the institution of marriage than I did on my own well-being, which was wrong. And so I needed to reevaluate my thinking and my beliefs. And so start educating yourself on what healthy love and relationships actually look like. And don't make excuses for how your relationship is dysfunctional. I also want you to be aware that you may have anxiety and depression. And for a time, until you're further down your healing process, you might need to consider medication. Medication can be a great temporary way to start the process. It's so hard to function when you're really depressed or if you have a lot of anxiety. And so a temporary support tool of medication can be really helpful. Okay, so I want to just end by saying I'll take your questions and answers. I know we're at the end of our time, but I'll stay over that. Healing takes time, but every small step matters. I promise you that. Just start taking the steps today and every day. Find your safety, find clarity, find yourself again. You're not alone. We're here with you. We'll walk alongside you. Reach out to us if you have any specific questions, and ask your questions now if you'd like to. Thank you.
Okay, Annette. First, we have had a very full chat today, which has been amazing.
Oh, good.
Yes, I have privately responded to most everyone. But I wanted to highlight to you, Annette, because you're not seeing it. Basically, this community is absolutely beautiful and amazing. Lots of support, lots of people validating, relating.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes.
Yes, yes. And so I'm really just grateful watching that. And so I did write that in the chat, but I wanted you to know that as well as you're speaking.
Well, thank you for being active in the chat. You see how helpful it is for one another when you share your comments and you support each other. I just think that's so beautiful. Sometimes we don't get support and validation from our friends or family, and we can come to places like this and really experience the true validation that you deserve. So thank you for being active in the chat.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and read. I have, I'll scroll the chat back to make sure, but I do have 2 questions here that I'm going to go ahead and share with you. I'll share the first one. It says, I understand that couples counseling is not working with abuse. The problem is that my husband doesn't want at all to work with a therapist like those at the Marriage Recovery Center. If he just hears the word abuse or narcissism, he freaks out. He doesn't want to be labeled as an abuser or take responsibility. So what to do? Also, our counselor wants to be fair, and my husband frequently lies about what happens between us. What do I do to save the marriage?
This might sound harsh, and I say this with so much compassion because I can so relate to this. This was my mindset for 15 years of my marriage. What can I do to save the marriage? You have done everything. You have tried everything. You have said everything. You have corrected every mistake. You have taken responsibility for more than your share. It's time for your husband to say, what can I do to save the marriage? You cannot change him. You cannot make him think differently. You cannot make him take responsibility. And you cannot experience health and safety if your husband is not willing to accept responsibility, not even willing to accept the term narcissistic or abusive. It's not change can come with that. For change to happen, they have to, I'm going to briefly say the 4 pillars of abuse that I briefly mentioned are a faulty belief system. So something like patriarchy would be a faulty belief system. Entitlement, that's when they think that they deserve to be treated almost like in a superior position, like they have the dominant role in the relationship, or that they're entitled to not be held accountable, but you have to be held accountable. So he's entitled to not be called a narcissist if he is one. He's entitled to not face the word abuse, even though he's abusive, because he's better than that. He's not in reality. Those things need to be unpacked. The other issue is image management. That's the other pillar. They care more about how they're being perceived by others than they do behind closed doors. And they need to be able to overcome those pillars. So like my husband now, after years of work, I can say that's narcissistic, or, I love my husband to death, but there's narcissistic tendencies. I can say it right in front of him. And he's like, yep, that's right. They have to be able to feel comfortable in their own skin based on the truth. The other pillar is a lower emotional IQ. They don't relate emotionally. They don't really want to assimilate your emotions. So of course he wants to be in couples therapy where he can dominate the therapist in you. And your therapist is making a big mistake by thinking that he or she needs to be fair. They need to 100% align with the person being harmed. And lying in therapy, oh my gosh, when I was in therapy, there were so many false accusations thrown at me, and I couldn't even figure out it was a false accusation. I was like, wait, what? I never said that. I would start answering it. And instead, if it would have been more helpful for me to say, that is a false accusation. It is not true, and I'm not going to entertain this. You're doing the same ploy to avoid the true topic, to avoid the point that I'm trying to raise in this session, and I'm not going to waste time entertaining your lies. Like, I should have been really firm or saying, therapist, this is a lie. It's a pattern that I want you to recognize, rather than facing what's really happening. He throws out false accusations and lies to derail the session. And I am not going to continue paying money to have you as a therapist entertain these lies. I want you to focus on the pattern that these lies keep happening. It's very difficult to be in couples therapy with somebody who's doing this. It's so traumatizing. I don't want you to keep being a pincushion to your husband's actions. You need to start working and changing your mindset. Not what can you do to save the marriage? What can you do to get stronger? What can you do to emotionally detach so that you can more objectively look at your situation? It's not about saving the marriage. It's about you getting stronger, you finding autonomy. I'm not telling you have to leave ever or right now, but it's very hard to heal from trauma while you continually are being re-traumatized. What worked for saving my marriage was me, even though it was extremely painful and I was very weak and I didn't have autonomy at all, was seeking a separation because, frankly, I was so ill with all these autoimmune illnesses. I was in and out of the doctor's office every week, in and out of the emergency room. I was too sick to take it anymore. I had no choice but to separate, or I felt like I was going to die of cancer. I didn't have the courage really to separate. I just had to do it. And that gave my husband the reality check that he needed. Dr. David Hawkins at the Marriage Recovery Center says there needs to be a breakdown before there can be a breakthrough, meaning they need to feel some pain before they're going to be motivated to change. The more you keep accommodating him, the more he's going to keep taking advantage of it. That's just the way their mind works. And so I really need you to reframe that. And if you want to reach out to me and send me an email, I'm happy to talk to you more about that. I hope that wasn't too strong.
No, thank you so much, Annette. We had someone write, thank you, Annette. I am years into this journey of healing, and I'm here to tell people healing is possible. It's terrifying to leave, but you can be safe and whole outside of the false security of staying married at any cost. Sending love and support to everyone struggling with this, because there were several
Yes.
related.
It actually is it is painful. I'm not going to lie. It is painful to break the trauma bond and to go through all the steps that you need to take. But if you stay the course, you are so much more empowered and mentally healthy, and attractive, frankly, to either motivate your current spouse or to somebody new. You are just so much more healthy, and you can't sustain being abused for the rest of your life. It is not sustainable. It's not good for your family. It's certainly not good for you. And there is so much hope on the other side. It's really good on the other side.
Yes. Okay, our next question says, I decided to stay in my abusive marriage at least for some time for personal reasons. Being well aware of what was going on. My husband lives in denial. I want to heal, but my therapist, who is aware of the abuse, tells me this isn't possible as you are still seeing him and he insists on intimacy. I am desperate.
I don't know enough about your situation, so I'm just going to take a crack at it. I don't know the type of abuse that your husband is employing against you. And I don't know if it's because you are engaging in these hopeless conversations. I would encourage you to emotionally detach and really disconnect and stop engaging in these conversations. Stop bringing any of your vulnerabilities, any of your need to emotionally connect. Maybe stop being intimate. Stop all of that and work on your autonomy. If you've decided to stay for whatever your reasons are, and I would really reevaluate those reasons, because even if you only have 2 nickels to rub together in a small apartment, it's going to be so much more peaceful, and your mental and physical health is worth it. It is your personhood that is worth your care and priority. If your husband is like a rageaholic and is always yelling at you and putting you down, I don't see how you can stay in the same environment. It takes a person with a lot of strength to be able to disengage from that. And so I would really reevaluate your priorities and listen to this workshop again about detaching and autonomy and some of those things, and see if you're making some mistakes that need correction, that areas that you can work on yourself. It's hard for me to be more specific than that, not knowing exactly what's going on in your situation. Is there any other questions, Jill?
Yes. One says, I'm separated and was doing good for 2 weeks, starting to get my system regulated. He emailed me with his explaining of why he abused. I didn't want to respond and knew I shouldn't, but I did, seeing his therapist. How do I stop getting sucked in and not respond with emotion and not get dysregulated?
Oh, I know how hard it is. I remember just writing these diatribe emails. It was such a waste of time. Don't give them your vulnerabilities. Don't share that much of your heart. It's not going to help them. He wants to hook you in. That lets him still control you. You need to send the message, I will not be controlled. You need to practice what, you may have heard this, gray rock, where you only respond to what is absolutely necessary. Like, what time do I need to pick up the kids? Or I made a deposit into the bank account and you can now make a withdrawal. I mean, basic things. You simply do not respond to the other things. Nothing you say or do is going to change them. You need to send the message that you are taking a stand. You are not going to be controlled, manipulated, or sucked into these conversations. Gray rock and autonomy and detachment. I just want you to know that nothing you write in those emails is going to make him change. In fact, you're just emboldening him when you do that. You're emboldening his abusiveness and giving him more power over you. So if you want the abuse to stop engaging in those emails, because you're just empowering him to do that even more, and to keep controlling you and feeling he's right and that what he's doing is working. And you want to show him that what he's doing doesn't work. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and several people have agreed with gray rocking and everything that you were saying, Annette. I'm scrolling through the chat here to make sure there's so much that's been shared, so many great points. So grateful for everyone who is supporting each other. It's like a big community, Annette, and I know you'll get to see this when we are off of here, but it is just such a blessing. I think I've addressed all the questions.
All right.
If not, they can reach out to us.
Well, I need to run because I'm borrowing somebody else's house today. I'm out of state. So I'm so glad we were able to get to all the questions. And I so want to thank you for your participation and your support of one another and your care and your validation. It's a powerful community of survivors who are there for each other. And so I thank you so much for that. And I guess until next time, take really good care of yourself. Bye.